Hi, everybody. Today we're talking about how do governments act. And that makes it sound like, do they act, badly? Or they act, what I mean is, how do governments get stuff done? That's the question today. What you saw in that video and you read in the chapter was really about those stages of public policy. What are the steps that really need to be gone through to go from we're not talking about this thing to actually putting something in place that is a policy. And again, one of the things that I find so interesting about that video is because of the zombies, we really pay attention to it. You could also say the same thing about coronavirus. Like you could say, obviously people in Washington are talking about this. Obviously they're moving through these stages as quickly as possible so that they can get to some place where they have resolution. One of the things we need to think about, though, is that a lot of areas of public policy aren't like immediately demanding like a zombie invasion would be or the coronavirus is. And so these processes take a lot longer and they're harder to get people excited about. I may be excited about agricultural policies, but nobody else really wants to talk about those particular things. And so it gets stuck in certain parts of that process. But I think that video does a pretty good job of highlighting what the book said. So I'm not going to go into public or the stages of public policy again. I think you guys have that. What I do want to talk about today is I want to talk about sort of some theories about how we think public policy works. So let's ignore that one. That's a mistake. Okay. So the question is, so it was another question I sort of asked you in Canvas. I said, where in that video are you, the average voter, the average citizen? And the answer is you didn't exist in that video except to the extent that you might be impacted by that policy, or you might have helped choose the people who go to Washington to do it. But when it comes to public policy, honestly, where does the voter come in? If we want to talk about power to the people and that sort of thing, like where does it come in? So we're going to look at we're going to look at really two theories, but we're going to throw in a third one there. That's an interesting one to think about that we mentioned a little bit on Tuesday. So in a democracy, how does this work? So the first one is the one we're not going to really spend time on. It's called direct democracy. And this is the will of the people with no representatives. And it's not really something that we do where there's a public policy, all those stages of public policy that you, the average citizen, is asked to chime in on. It's efficiency-wise, it just doesn't really work. If you've ever done a group project, you know how difficult it is to do anything by committee. So then if that committee is all of the American people, the odds of you getting something done, very, very remote. So, but could we talk about, for example, and we're not going to really spend some time on this, but could we talk about like some of the really important decisions, making those direct democracy? For example, if the United States is going to go to war, actually use force on another state, why not have everybody vote by phone whether we want that or not, rather than leave it up to the president or leave it up to the Congress? It's a question. I don't know that that's the case. Direct democracy is an interesting thing. That was ancient Greece, but we don't really have this today, though it is a theory that's out there. Where we really are, what it really comes down to when we're talking about how does, who actually makes policy in a democracy, there's two ways to look at this. One is this concept of pluralism, which is, we've talked about this before, it's groups in competition. So I see myself as part of this group over here or this group over here, and that group together works to achieve some policy, whether to get it on the agenda or to get some particular policy for it passed or help it get implemented some certain way. And different groups are going to care about different things. If I'm a farmer, I'm going to care about different policies than someone who lives in the city. And so when I say groups, I don't necessarily mean that I join a group, though I could, like a political party or an interest group or something like that, but just in the sense that Iowa farmers who raise Iowa corn farmers tend to have very similar interests. They don't have to join a group to really all be pushing for similar things. So that's what I mean is groups in competition, that the United States, for example, is made up of lots of groups, and you belong to multiple groups at the same time, and they're all in competition to try and get things done. And they're going to want different things. They're going to want to talk about different things. So that's pluralism. We'll talk more about that in a second. The other one we want to talk about is elitism. And elitism sounds awful, right? We don't even like the term elitism. It just sounds like elitist, that kind of thing. But what I mean here is not that essentially, well, I guess it does mean elitism in the sense of that there are people in the society who actually do the decision making. And that's going to be what we call the ruling class. Now, when I say the ruling class, don't imagine that you get some sort of a card or some sort of a membership that you're in the ruling class. It just means that there are some people who are going to be more likely sitting around the table doing the public policy than others, from politicians to bureaucrats to things like that. And the answer is, are you one of those people? Probably not. Even though you're a citizen and it's government by the people for the people, you're not doing the heavy lifting. You're essentially, like that video sort of showed, you're choosing who gets to sit at the tables to some degree, but for the most part, you're really not part of the process itself. So we're going to look at pluralism and elitism. Those are the two things we're going to look at today in terms of who actually makes policy in a democracy. So here's the first thing. We're going to talk about pluralism. If I can get this to work.